Hello, thank you for joining me on this informational session on Green Mountain Conservation Group and Saco River Corridor Commission's joint citizen science tributary monitoring program known as RIVERS. I am Jill Emerson, the Water Quality Coordinator at Green Mountain Conservation Group and the Project Manager for the RIVERS program of the Saco River Corridor Commission. So RIVERS is an acronym. It stands for the Regional Interstate Volunteers for the Ecosystems and Rivers of Saco. As mentioned, this is a joint endeavor between the Green Mountain Conservation Group and Saco River Corridor Commission that started about 17 years ago. Each program had its own independent water quality monitoring program, and it made sense for the two organizations to join up and have a singular, cohesive monitoring program that encompasses the entirety of the Saco watershed. So here is the Saco River watershed. It is split almost equally in half between eastern New Hampshire and western Maine. It's approximately 1,700 square miles, and there are three major tributaries of the Saco River: the Swift River, the Ossipee River, and the Little Ossipee Rivers. In this watershed, there is approximately 150,000 people and around 63 towns and incorporations and villages. And what is most interesting is while this is a large watershed, it is one of the least studied watersheds of Maine. So our tributary monitoring program, RIVERS, is conducted by citizen scientists who have been trained to follow a Quality Assurance Project Plan, or a QAP, that has been approved by both the New Hampshire and Maine state governments and the EPA. Our citizen science portion of this program runs bi-weekly between the months of May and October, where sampling is done before 9 a.m. Each of our sites takes about 20 minutes or so to monitor. And last year, our program, we were excited to have about 40 volunteers participating in the program between the two states. This is pretty amazing because our citizen science program is actually starting its 18th year in 2020. And so for having a program successfully run that long is no small feat. So for the Green Mountain Conservation Group, which mostly takes care of sites in the New Hampshire side of the watershed, in what we refer to as the Ossipee subwatershed, there are 29 sites that we monitor, located here on the map on your right, with Ossipee, Effingham, and Freedom taking up many of those site locations, but each of the 7 towns does have a site that we monitor. In addition, Green Mountain Conservation Group follows 10 of those sites year-round as conditions allow. Meanwhile, at the Saco River Corridor Commission, we follow 34 sites across the Saco watershed. Most of them are in Maine, with Fryeburg being the town that is heavily represented with 6 monitoring site locations. You can see the map on the right-hand side show that we follow sites from Conway, New Hampshire, all the way down to the Saco Biddeford outlet to the ocean. So in 2000, Green Mountain Conservation Group worked with the UNH Cooperative Extension to produce a natural resources inventory map for each of the towns in the watershed. Meanwhile, downstream, Saco River Corridor Commission was starting to do their own water quality monitoring program, and it made sense for the two organizations to join up and produce one cohesive sampling program that we know today as RIVERS. So, what do we sample for in the RIVERS tributary monitoring program? So our volunteers are trained to go out bi-weekly, and each time they go out, they collect information at their site for temperature, turbidity, which is also water clarity. They take a sample for pH. They also take dissolved oxygen readings, both in milligrams per liter and as a percentage. And they also take a reading of conductivity, which in many cases can be used as a proxy for salt. For Green Mountain Conservation Group, samples are taken monthly for an additional cation and anion analysis and nutrient analysis for things like phosphorus and nitrogen. And you can see here listed some of the cations and anions we monitor for, like calcium, sodium, chloride, magnesium, and potassium. Saco River Corridor Commission, meanwhile, does E. coli grab samplings either on a biweekly or a weekly basis at select locations. Now, there's many benefits our volunteers get from participating in the program. What's really quite interesting and quite fun to do is that the program is essentially a time capsule of who was living in the watershed during a monitoring season, and we can go back in time and actually see different pieces of data that our volunteers have collected. And it's really nice to be able to go back and reflect, particularly with our volunteers who have been in the program for quite some time, not only the data points that they've collected, but how they can see that their stream is changing in real time or maybe staying the same. Our volunteers also enjoy getting up and out into nature first thing in the morning. Many of them have made new friends from the program. We do try to partner up people with personalities that we think will mesh. And so it's a great experience to get out and do some good in your watershed first thing in the morning, and enjoy listening to the birds chirping and having your feet in some nice cool water. There's also lots of benefits, not just for a personal volunteer, but for science in general from this program. We have released multiple 10-year water quality reports. And right now we're working on creating a report for the entire set of data that we have collected from this program. Talks have been given using our data, and scientific publications have also been using Green Mountain Conservation Group and Saco River Corridor Commission group data. Our local governments, like New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services and Maine Department of Environmental Protection, use our data for their reports. And we also attend conferences to talk about our data with other scientists in academia or in industry so that they can see the benefits of the citizen science program that we've been running. There's also, on a smaller level, but equally as important, benefits for the communities in which this program is running. So we make it a point to go to as many conservation or selectmen meetings that we can and explain the data that we have collected in the town so that they can use it for planning purposes. We also do try to alert towns if we notice changes in their water quality. We have shared this data with different school districts so that they can get a sense of what is happening to the water in their area, and we run other educational programs that take those data that have been collected, and the students will use them to do their own evaluation. These programs include Trout in the Classroom and our volunteer biological assessment program, which our students go out and look at macrovertebrates in the water systems. So having this plethora of data that have been collected for 17 going on 18 years has been really invaluable to these programs and helping the kids to see not only what their water quality was during the year that they were in school collecting those samples, but also what past years have seen and how the water has changed. So what we need from Rivers volunteers is we need people who are early risers who enjoy nature and science. We also do need our volunteers to care about their safety. We go through in their training session a slide about their safety and what they should do in different scenarios to make sure that they're always safe. We want volunteers who want to help their communities determine what their water health is. Our volunteers also will frequently go out and pick up litter, or they notice other community issues that they can alert appropriate peoples to. Our volunteers are also immeasurable to the Saco River Corridor Commission and to Green Mountain Conservation Group. Last year, our volunteers contributed about $15,000 worth of services to the Saco watershed, and that is services that were provided for free because our volunteers care so passionately about the environment that they live. So as a volunteer, you need very minimal things. You need reliable transportation to and from sampling sites. You need to have some clothes that you are okay getting wet in. While we don't encourage our volunteers to plunge into the rivers, there is a possibility that they're going to get wet up to about their shins. And so having clothing that is okay to do that in is necessary. We strongly recommend a buddy, even if it's somebody who is not trained in the Rivers program, somebody that you can go out and monitor safely with, so that if something should happen, you do have another person there who can assist you. We strongly recommend boots, but as you can see, not all of our volunteers go for boots, and that's okay. But I will say that water in May and October is pretty darn cold, and it can definitely cramp up your feet. But lastly, what we really need from our volunteers is an intrepid spirit. I would love to tell you that every monitoring day when our volunteers go out, it is 72 degrees and sunny weather, but that is not the case living in New Hampshire and Maine. And so there are going to be, unfortunately, times where the weather is not super cooperative and it may not be the most fun to go out and sample, but our volunteers still go out and they still get the job done. That being said, we don't allow our volunteers to go out if there is thunder and lightning or the threat of flooding, so we do ask them to use their best judgment when they go out and do sampling. Our Rivers volunteers are provided with equipment in order to successfully monitor. They do attend a training session that typically happens before the season starts so that they may learn the entire protocol based on what is written in the QOP, and that they can feel comfortable with the equipment before they go out into the field. So the type of equipment that they learn to use is a Hatch multimeter, a blue thermometer that they use for a check to the meter. They are given conductivity and DO probes, and they are taught how to calibrate the dissolved oxygen probes. And they're also given a turbidity meter to do their turbidity testing with. Volunteers are also provided with a small first aid kit and a couple of other supplies to make sampling a little bit easier for them. We do take our volunteers' both physical and mental well-being into consideration when we assign them sites. We like to know what distance our volunteers are comfortable driving and what type of terrain are they comfortable with navigating. We do have a few sites that have some relatively difficult terrain, and so without asking a ton of personal questions, we do like to just get a general idea of whether or not a volunteer feels comfortable enough to traverse different types of terrain, or whether or not they feel comfortable balancing on rocks. In some cases on culverts. One site used to have a beaver dam at it that volunteers kind of had to navigate over. So these are different things, different pieces of information that we like to collect from our volunteers just to make sure that they are as satisfied with the program as can be. There are definitely things we can't change about the program. Sampling has to be done before 9 a.m. That takes into account a lot of biological processes like photosynthesis and respiration that might be kicking up in the morning times. So there are considerations, there are things that we can't change to the program. But we do like volunteer feedback to change the program as much as we can so that there is a comfort level that the volunteers have when they're out monitoring. We don't like anybody to feel that they're unappreciated or that they're totally by themselves and that we haven't considered their needs and their wants, and we do the best that we can. Finally, I'd like to leave you just with a collection of some of the volunteers that we've had over the 17 years of the program out in the watershed collecting data. This program would not be successful without the hard work and continuing work that these individuals provide, both Green Mountain Conservation Group and the Saco River Corridor Commission, and we simply cannot thank them enough for being volunteers and helping to protect the health of this watershed. I have gotten to know many of these volunteers personally over the years, and they are all just a delight, and I am so thankful and so appreciative that they come back every year to the program. So if you think you have what it takes to be a Rivers Water Quality Monitoring volunteer, feel free to reach out to us at either of the two websites listed below. info@gmcg.org or srcc@srcc-maine.org. We would love to hear from you. Don't be shy. If it's in the middle of the sampling season, we would still love to hear from you. There's typically a need for substitute volunteers, and occasionally we do have sites that open up throughout the year that need a volunteer to monitor at. So again, info@gmcg or srcc@srcc-maine. Thanks for tuning in. Again, my name was Jill Emerson.